Situated in the northern Marianas, the island of Tinian is 1,500 miles from the Japanese mainland, 100 miles north of Guam, and 3 miles southwest of Saipan. Over the ages, the Spanish and Germans had dominated this 39-square-mile tropical paradise. After occupying it for agricultural purposes in 1914, the Japanese started to fortify it in the latter stages of the war, after realizing its potential value as an American air base for the long-range Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers. Tinian is most likely most famous today for being the starting point for the American atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. However, Tinian was the most recent of a series of Pacific islands that served as American stepping stones to the home islands of the Japanese back in July 1944. As the assault and seizure of Saipan proceeded, Lieutenant General Holland M., the Expeditionary Force's commander, Holland Mad Smith, focused on Tinian's capture. With 9,000 Japanese soldiers garrisoned there, Smith said that Tinian was set to become the most perfect amphibious operation of the Pacific War. But the operation would not be without controversy. The senior American authorities engaged in a protracted and contentious debate over which landing beaches should be utilized. The commander of the Joint Expeditionary Force, Vice Admiral Richmond Kelly "Terrible" Turner, preferred landing on the northeastern shore at Yellow Beach. Smith, Rear Admiral Harry W. Howlin' Mad, both Madgy General Harry Schmidt, who commanded the northern troops and landing force, and Handsome Harry Hill, who led the northern attack force, strongly opposed Turner's selection of Yellow Beach and suggested two more weakly fortified beaches, White 1 and White 2, on the island's northern tip, both of which were less than 200 yards wide. According to amphibious doctrine, a beach must be at least 1,000 yards wide in order to support a landing the size of a division. White Beach 1 would allow 8 amphibious tractors to land at once, according to planners, while White Beach 2 could accommodate 16 at once. Exasperated, Admiral Hill and Turner departed the meeting. He claimed that Turner simply would not listen, and again ordered me in very positive terms to issue my plan for the landing at Tinian Town and to stop all White Beach planning. Howlin' Mad Smith remembered, our session on board the USS Rocky Mount, ACG-3, generated considerable unprintable language. Terrible Turner's position set the stage for a confrontation. Turner bellowed, "Holland, you are not going to land on the White Beaches," during the contentious discussion. "I won't drop you off there." "Oh, you will," thundered Smith in response. "Any goddamn place I tell you to, you'll land me. Here, I'm the one that develops the strategic plans. The only thing you need to do is let me know whether you can land my men there." "I'm telling you now, it can't be done," Turner insisted. "It isn't conceivable at all. 2 divisions cannot possibly be landed on those beaches." "How are you aware that it isn't possible?" Smith fired back. "You're so fucking afraid that some of your boats will get damaged." Smith claimed that the argument lasted for hours, as both men attempted to persuade the other that their opinions were valid. "The only beaches that are practical are at Tinian Town, and we are going to land there," Turner argued. Smith firmly retorted, "We'll have another Tarawa if we go ashore in Tinian Town. Of course, the Japanese will kill us." Smith mentioned the upcoming recon of the landing beaches by the Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion. To a crazed bull, it was akin to raising a red flag. "They don't know what to look for," Turner said. "They are merely Marines. If you continue to discuss the notion, people will make fun of you. They will consider you an old fool." Smith responded, "You know goddamn well that it's my business and none of yours to say where we'll land," just as he was getting steamed up. "I will fight you to the end if you claim you won't put us ashore. I will discuss it with Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, who is in charge of the 5th Fleet, and if need with, Admiral Chester Nimitz, who is in charge of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Just write that down in your damn book now." "I never saw Kelly Turner when he was so mean and cantankerous as on that occasion," Hill wrote later. "He must have been feeling a little ill." When Smith persuaded Turner to postpone making a choice on the landing beach until the reconnaissance's findings were in, the discussion came to an end. Admiral Turner subsequently said, "I consider Holland Smith a very fine tactical general, an able administrator, and I consider him one of my very best friends, notwithstanding the contentious dispute." General Smith wasn't that giving. A naval officer who had never led troops ashore and was ignorant of the fundamentals of land combat contested my ideas. Kelly Turner is a fierce, vivacious, and unrelenting taskmaster. The meticulous exterior belies a tremendous amount of resolve. He is a bit of a wimpy person. The moniker Terrible Turner wasn't given to him arbitrarily. The Amphibious Reconnaissance Company would resolve the dispute. Under the leadership of Captain James L. Jones, the father of General James L. Jones, Jr., who would go on to become the 32nd Commandant of the Marine Corps, it was established in January 1943 at Camp Elliott, California. The company changed its name to Amphibious Reconnaissance Company, V. Amphibious Corps, VAC, Pacific Fleet in August 1943. On April 14, 1944, the company was reorganized into a two-company battalion and assigned the VAC Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion, Amphibious Corps, Pacific Fleet, at the request of Lieutenant General Smith. Under the leadership of newly promoted to Major James L. Jones, the VAC Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion was assigned to conduct a nighttime reconnaissance of the beaches of Tinian, alongside underwater demolition, Teams 5 and 7. They had several different goals: determining the types of landing craft that could be landed on each beach, the types of vehicles that could cross the reef and move inland, the height and characteristics of the cliffs and the vegetation behind the beaches, the depth of the water, and the characteristics of the off-lying reef, and the likelihood that infantry could climb the cliffs without the use of cargo nets or ladders were all part of their mission. Captain Merwin H. Yellow Beach was assigned to Silver Silverthorn, Junior's Company A, and a group of frogmen from Navy Underwater Demolition, Team 7, while the two white beaches were given to First Lieutenant Leo B. Shins, Company B, and 12 swimmers from Underwater Demolition, Team 5, which was commanded by the renowned frogman, Lieutenant CMDR Draper L. Kaufman. The battalion leaders and a few chosen non-commissioned officers, NCOs, boarded the USS Gilmer, APD-11, a repurposed World War I four-stack destroyer transport, on July 8th, and took a voyage around Tinian's west coast. According to Shin, the trip was designed to allow us to examine the beaches via binoculars and familiarize ourselves with the island's horizontal silhouette so that we could more easily navigate during the ensuing reconnaissance. The next evening, both recon companies practiced off the purple beaches in Magician Bay, Saipan, with swimmers from UDT-7. It was decided together that the UDT would do the hydrographic reconnaissance, and the Marines would reconnoiter and gather the information about the actual beach and the terrain, Shin recalled. 10 black neoprene rubber landing craft, LCRs, were launched by the APD at midnight, while they were 3,000 yards offshore. The ship's landing craft then dragged the LCRs to a location 1,500 yards off the shore. The swimmers entered the sea after carefully paddling the LCRs to a spot 500 yards offshore, according to Shin. Each swimmer had a torch, an inflatable CO2 rubber lifebelt, and a package of aviator's yellow emergency dye. According to Shin, the rehearsal went according to plan and was finished at around 0500 the next morning. The night of July 10-11 was designated for the actual reconnaissance of the beaches of Tinian, Shin added. Planning the reconnaissance, acquainting the troops with the strategy, and conducting debarkation exercises and rehearsals took up the entire day. All available aerial photos, maps, etc. of the beaches were thoroughly examined. According to the plans, the recon Marines and frogmen would be transported by USS Gilmer and USS Stringham, APD-6, to the target area, which was about 3,000 yards off the coast, where they would board 10-man rubber boats. The boats would be towed 500 yards off each beach by landing craft from ships with muted exhausts. The boats would then be paddled to a location that was just beyond the surf zone. The first series of reconnaissances were made as secretly as possible, and, in order to avoid the disclosure of landing intention, positive orders were issued that any mines and obstacles found there were under no circumstances to be disturbed, said Admiral Turner, who expressed concern about warning the Japanese. To conduct the reconnaissance on Yellow Beach, Captain Silverthorne chose 8 swimmers from Lieutenant Richard F. Burke's UDT-7 and 20 swimmers from Company A. The team set out for the beach about 10:45 p.m., when the moon was hidden by clouds. According to Major Jones, 2 sharp reports resembling rifle fire and showing flashes were heard off the south end of the main Yellow Beach when the rubber boats were about 500 yards offshore. Jones, under orders to stay under cover, directed the boats to head north and attempt to obtain hydrographic information from the reef. These were followed by 2 dull reports resembling the noise of mortars. In addition to several underwater boulders and potholes, UDT-7 discovered floating mines in the beach approaches. Swimmers saw nearly impassable 20 to 25-foot high cliffs on the flanks of the 125-yard wide beach. Marines under the command of 2nd Lieutenant Donald F. Neff found that the Japanese had installed double-aproned barbed wire on the beach itself. With just a knife, Neff left his soldiers at the high water line and made his way 30 yards inland through the wire to find escape routes. He could hear Japanese laborers working nearby as he crawled along. He once caught sight of 3 Japanese sentries watching the shoreline from a cliff. Despite shining headlights into the shore from time to time, they were unable to identify the Marine officer. Neff discovered that the Japanese were constructing up defenses right in front of the planned landing spot. He returned to his guys and swam back to the rubber boat after a terrifying time ashore. Later, Neff received the Silver Star for leading the recon team for Company A that evening. Yellow Beach was found to have fairly heavy surf and was unsuitable for a large body of troops because of the steep cliffs and narrow exits. The commander of Task Force 52 said, in reference to the reconnaissance, "It was agreed that the landing would only take place at White Beaches 1 and 2. White Beach 1 is the northernmost beach, and Shin divided his firm into 2 teams, one for White Beach 1 and another for White Beach 2. As a lieutenant at the time, Brig. General Russell E. Corey said, "The beaches were about 60 yards and 160 yards. 1,000 yards of rugged beachfront separated the two. The 2 Marine squads departed Gilmer about 11:30 p.m. According to Shin, debarkation proceeded smoothly until the LCRs were removed from their tows. Both teams were carried north by a powerful tidal current. About 800 yards north of Tinian, the White Beach 1 crew touched down on a coral protrusion, but they never made it to shore. They would have been transported even further into the Saipan Channel if it weren't for the coral outcrop. After landing on White Beach 1, the White Beach 2 team quickly surveyed the beach and its surroundings. The UDT swimmers searched the water offshore in the meantime, but they were unable to uncover anything that would prevent a landing. Lieutenant J.G. George Surland led a troop of frogmen that crept onto the beach above the high water mark to investigate a report of mines being planted, but he discovered no explosives. It was exceedingly hard to find the rubber boats during the retrieval because, to the northerly current, low scudding clouds, and a slight fog. Sergeant Sam Lanford, PFC, Gunnery, Lieutenant CMDR Kaufman, the UDT commander, and John Seaburn were swept into the canal, separating Tinian from Saipan after missing the recovery. After several hours of treading water, USS Dickerson, APD-21, a picket boat cruising the channel, eventually came to their aid. Luckily, the men were kept afloat by the flotation bladders they had packed in their jackets. Jones dispatched Silverthorne's Company A to recon White Beach 2 the following evening, after just half of the mission was completed. Jones clarified, plans were made to land the troops on the USS Stringham and pick them up on the USS Gilmer. 1 drone rubber boat with a mounted tripod wrapped in wire mesh, and 5 rubber boats with paddlers and swimmers were towed to a point 1,900 yards off White Beach 2. The makeshift radar reflector was created because Jones attributed the failure on the first night to a lack of surface radar on the Gilmer to guide the boats to the beach. Silverthorne provided 6 two-man swimmer teams, consisting of 1 officer and 1 senior staff NCO, while Company B provided the boats and personnel. The recon team was also accompanied by 12 UDT swimmers. The The rubber boats departed at 1,900 yards, according to Jones, and the ship radio guided them. The ship was able to direct the boats to a location 400 yards out to sea and 100 yards south of White Beach 2, thanks to the steel helmets worn by all of the men in the LCRs and the wire mesh tripod. Using the side stroke or the breaststroke to avoid splashing or creating noise, all of the swimmer teams then slid into the water and headed toward the beach. They had darkened their faces and necks with camouflage paint, and only their heads were above the water, making them nearly invisible. Several swimmers were slashed by the jagged coral, but the men were able to move through the deep water across the reef without being seen. As soon as the recon Marines landed, they concluded that the beach was clear of obstructions and that there was no sign of Japanese activity. The UDT surveyed the ocean and the reef in front of the shoreline while the Marines worked the beach. 2 members of the crew were lying uncovered on the sand when a Japanese guard nearly walked on them, but they were not found. A very thorough reconnaissance of the surf conditions, reef, beach, and flanks was done, Silverthorne said. The teams finished their tasks and made their timely return to the recovery ships. Admiral, the beaches are narrow, but there are no mines, no coral heads, no boulders, no wire, no boat obstacles, and no offshore reefs, Silverthorne said, as he briefed Rear Admiral Hill on the reconnaissance's findings. The beaches are as level as the surface of a pool table. Hill was sold by that. You have persuaded me, he admitted. Silverthorne also received the Silver Star for his leadership. This was an extremely difficult operation that was almost perfectly executed, and the perfection of the execution is due both to the high competence of the Reconnaissance Battalion and the underwater demolition team, the Landing Force Operations Officer said, in summarizing the work and outcomes of the amphibious reconnaissance. After Vice Admiral Turner firmly rejected Rear Admiral Hill, Admiral Spruance took over the beach decision and convened a meeting of the main commanders on the afternoon of July 12th. Rear Admiral Hill and Lieutenant General Smith made a compelling argument for the White Beaches. Turner declared calmly and casually at the end of the presentation that he would agree to the concept. Hill wrote, "What a great relief that was for us all." Turner said, "Before the reconnaissance, I had tentatively decided to accept the White Beaches unless the reconnaissance reports were decidedly unfavorable." One participant later wrote, "We were all surprised at the unexpected rapidity and ease with which the plan was presented and accepted." When his early intransigence was criticized, Turner dismissed it. "I simply demanded that every potential landing spot be thoroughly examined and taken into account before making a decision, all of which are challenging for multiple reasons. And in keeping with a long-standing tradition, I held off on making a decision until after these investigations were completed and the primary components of the landing plan were established." By mid-afternoon on July 24th, Majors General Clifton Cates' 4th Marine Division's assault forces had successfully landed over the White Beaches with little losses. The 2nd Marine Division landed over the same beaches the following day. Both divisions were not looking forward to another slugging contest, because they had sustained significant losses during the Saipan operation. Over the previous 18 months, the 2nd Marine Division had been particularly severely struck, suffering 1,000 losses on Guadalcanal and an extra 12,000 troops who had malaria. The division suffered a terrible experience at Tarawa 9 months later, losing 3,200 men, including around 1,000 fatalities. In June and July of 1944, a third island invasion took place at Saipan, which resulted in triumph, but also in the deaths of an additional 1,300 Marines and 5,000 wounded. About 29,000 Japanese soldiers lost their lives. Despite being relatively new, the 4th Marine Division had been bloodied in January and February 1944 at Roy Namur in the Marshall Islands, where it lost less than 800 Marines, which was a moderate amount of casualties. It suffered 6,000 losses, including roughly 1,000 fatalities, at the Battle of Saipan. It would be the first landing on Tinian under a new divisional commander, Madge, and the third in just over 6 months. Cates, Jen. The average strength of the 4th Division's battalions had dropped from 880 men to barely 565 men, a decrease of more than 35%, as a result of their depletion at Saipan. The morale of the troops committed to the Tinian operation was generally high, wrote Major Carl W. Hoffman in the battle's official history. This information only becomes significant when one remembers that the Marines involved had just survived a grueling 25-day battle and that they were scheduled to attack enemy-held coastlines once more after a mere 2-week break as opposed to a 2-week rest. Their attitude was more evident in a philosophical shrug and a "here we go again" statement than in a bitter grumble about being called upon so quickly. In 2 weeks, the Marines should control the island, according to Admiral Turner. Lieutenant General Holland Smith was replaced as commander of the VU Amphibious Corps by Maji, General Harry Schmidt, who promised to complete the task in 10 days. In fact, it would only take 9. Rear Admiral Hill separated the island into 5 fire support sectors and ordered a massive naval bombardment for each to reduce the fear of the Marines ashore and to deceive the Japanese as to the true location of the landings. The hardest hit was Tinian Town. The cruisers Cleveland and Louisville, 7 destroyers, and the battleships Colorado, Tennessee, and California, all of which were damaged at Pearl Harbor, were responsible for the damage. 2 6-inch coastal defense guns at Phoebus San Hilo Point that would have interfered with the landing on White 1 and 2 beaches were taken out by the Colorado's 16-inch guns. In response, the Japanese fired 22 rounds at the Colorado, killing 43 sailors and injuring 198 more. Later, the Tennessee arrived to complete the coastal fortifications. On J-Day, JIG being the Tinian operations equivalent of D-Day, naval barrages were halted 3 times so that American air power could bombard Tinian Town's beaches, railroad intersections, pillboxes, gun emplacements, and roadways. Over 350 Army and Navy aircraft participated, releasing 34 napalm bombs, 200 rockets, 42 incendiary clusters, and 500 bombs. The 4th Marine Division moved to 37 LSTs, landing ship Tank, at anchor near Saipan once the softening up was complete. They received 3 days' worth of meals, water, medical supplies, and ammunition. Starting on July 15th, cars and other equipment were preloaded. According to one historian, the troops were going to travel light, no pack on their backs, and a spoon, a pair of socks, insect repellent, and emergency supplies in their pockets. The 4th Marine Force, the Assault Force, left for Tinian on July 24th, JIG Day. The assault soldiers would land in columns, consisting of companies, platoons, and squads, as the beaches were too narrow to allow battalions to land alongside. Major General Thomas E. had 2 regiments. Before making the actual landing with the 3rd Regiment on the weakly fortified northwest beaches, Watson's 2nd Marine Division staged a diversionary feint against Tinian Town in an attempt to encircle Japanese soldiers there, Terrible Tommy. A complete battalion of the Japanese 50th Infantry Regiment and other components of the 56th Naval Guard Force were frozen in place around Tinian Town by the Marines' feint, which was executed by 22 LCVPs, landing craft, vehicle, and personnel. Convinced that he had thwarted an invasion, Japanese Commander Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata informed Tokyo that his troops had repulsed 100 landing barges. But as he boasted about his success, the 25th Marine Regiment was landing at White Beach 2, and the 24th Marine Regiment was hitting White Beach 1 in 24 LVTs, landing vehicle tracked, also known as Amtraks or alligators. The whole 2nd Battalion of the 24th went ashore by 8:20 a.m. While support vessels bombarded the beaches with rockets and cannon fire, the troop-laden LVTs took ineffective and dispersed rifle and machine gun fire during the 26-minute run-in to the beaches. A small number of defenders, holed up in caves and crevices at White Beach 1, took fire from the first wave of 24th Marines to land, but these hostile troops were swiftly annihilated. The whole 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 24th were ashore on White 1 and getting ready to go inland in less than an hour. By 4 p.m., the 2nd Battalion had advanced to the western border of Airfield No. 3 and had cut the major road connecting Airfield No. 1 with the east coast and southern Tinian, despite intermittent artillery, mortar, and small arms fire. The 1st Battalion encountered stronger opposition from defenders firing from caverns to the left of the 2nd Battalion. Tanks with flame-throwing capabilities were summoned, but the obstinate Japanese resisted. The 24th 3rd Battalion, in reserve near the beach, was called up to cover a void that arose between the 1st and 2nd Battalions. 3 LVTs and a jeep were blown up as the 25th Marine Regiment landed at White Beach 2 in the middle of a dense minefield that had remained undiscovered. The mines took 6 hours to deactivate. Additionally, the defenders had deftly placed bombs inside beer cases and other memorabilia to murder or maim gullible Marines. The Marines also ran against 50th Regiment forces, who were well entrenched in caverns, pillboxes, and ravines as they advanced further inland. These troops retaliated with mortars, machine guns, and anti-tank and anti-boat weapons. The Marines made the decision to avoid them and let subsequent waves deal with them. Japanese artillery atop Mount Lasso, 2.5 miles away, where Ogata's headquarters were located, was also causing harassing fire. The commander of the 3D Battalion, 25th Marines, Lieutenant Cole, Justice M. There was a lot of uncertainty on the beach. The confusion you always get when you land of getting the organization together again, as Jumping Joe Chambers recalled. By sunset, the 2 battalions had dug in to see what the enemy would throw at them at night, forming a crescent-shaped beachhead that was 3,000 yards wide at the shore and expanding 1,500 yards inward. On Jig Day, the 4th Division Reserve's 23rd Marine Regiment had the most difficulties, but not from the enemy. They were detained on LSTs for the majority of the day until being told to board landing boats and make their way ashore, where they landed at 2 p.m. Colonel Lewis R. Jones, the regimental commander, experienced severe communication issues and was unable to communicate with his battalions and division for several hours. To make matters worse, the LVT he was riding in had a broken engine, and it took him and his crew 7 hours to land. The operation had proceeded somewhat smoothly otherwise. 48 medium Sherman tanks, 15 flame-throwing tanks, 24 half-tracks with 75mm guns, 4 battalions of artillery, and over 15,000 Marines were on the beach. The beachhead was almost a mile inland, but some battalions had not made it to their first-day targets. There had been only 15 Marine deaths and 225 injuries, compared to 438 Japanese losses. According to one historian, it had not been a bad day's work overall. The 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, supported the 24th Marines, which occupied the northern side of the defensive crescent. With the rest of the 23rd in reserve, the southern part was taken by the 25th and a battalion of the 23rd. Engineer battalions, special troops, and artillery battalions from the 10th and 14th Marines were on standby on the beaches in the rear. And they had to be vigilant. The Japanese had a reputation for persevering in the face of overwhelming odds. The American commanders were aware of the challenge they faced, and at the end of Jig Day, it would start after dark. As expected, the Japanese were getting ready to retaliate. Colonel Ogata relied on each unit on Tinian to be in charge of its own counterattack, since the American bombing had crippled his means of communication with his soldiers. He had issued an order last month to destroy the enemy on the beaches with one blow, especially where time prevents quick movement of forces within the island in the event of such an American arrival. Ogata's forces likely realized they were doomed because they were outnumbered and had no chance of evacuation or reinforcement. However, they promised that before they were slain, they would present a positive picture of themselves. They would make the emperor proud. The Japanese Mobile Counterattack Force, a 900-man battalion of the 135th Infantry Regiment, launched the counterattack at 10:30 p.m. by probing the middle of the Marine line, where the 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 24th Marines were dug in. The battalion was armed with rifles and explosive charges. The Marines summoned the guns when they noticed the advance elements. There was a large gully that ran from southeast to northwest and right into the western edge of our area, wrote Lieutenant Colder Chambers, commander of 3rd Battalion, 125th Marines. Any rational person would have assumed that gully would be used in the event of a counterattack. During the night, My men reported hearing a lot of Japanese conversation coming from the gully. Around midnight, they struck us in the vicinity of K Company. They carried two 75mm howitzers by hand, and they struck us with great force once they were positioned to fire at us. Although I believe K Company performed admirably, 150-200 Japanese were able to force their way through the 1,500 yards to the beach area. All of the artillery and machine guns began to fire furiously when the Japanese struck the rear sectors. They were grazing directly above our heads and firing from the back. Meanwhile, the enemy who struck L Company was fighting fiercely within 75 yards of my location, and I was powerless to stop them. The attack really developed over in K Company's area, Chambers added. There, Lieutenant Mickey McGuire was firing canister, anti-personnel shells loaded with big pellets for close-in combat from his 37mm cannons on the left flank. PFC, Alfred J. Daigle, and Corporal Alfred J. Daigle were two of my men. A machine gun was being manned by Orville H. Showers. These two boys arranged a cone of Japanese bodies in front of their machine gun. They were accompanied by a deceased Japanese officer. The boys were both deceased. A Marine combat correspondent described this fight as follows. Showers and Daigle held their fire until the Japanese were 100 yards away, then opened up. Screaming "Banzai!" the Japanese stormed while hurling hand grenades and light machine guns. The two Marines, well ahead of their own lines, could not possibly hold on. They were discovered dead the following morning, slumped over their weapons. There were at least 251 Japanese corpses stacked in front of them. Daigle received the Navy Cross posthumously, and Showers received the Silver Star. Two tank companies, led by Major Robert R. Neiman, arrived just before dawn, eager for a battle. Lieutenant Colers Chambers dispatched them to a position occupied by companies K and L. After a half hour, Neiman came back and declared, "Tanks are not necessary. Undertakers are necessary. I've never seen so many dead Japanese people." According to one account, the 50 caliber machine guns of batteries E and F literally tore the Japanese to pieces, while the 75mm pack howitzer gunners of Battery D, 14th Marines, also contributed to dispersing the enemy onslaught. When the Japanese attacked the middle of the Marine line, they killed roughly 600 people in all. Around 600 Special Naval Landing Force soldiers from the Ushi Point airfields launched an assault on the 1st Battalion, 24th Marines, around 2 a.m. on the left flank. With only 30 soldiers left to fight, Company A was severely damaged and had to enlist engineers, corpsmen, communicators, and shore party members as reinforcements. The battlefield was illuminated by illumination flares, which enabled the Marines to use mortars, rifles, machine guns, and 37mm canister shells to annihilate the assailants. Nevertheless, the battle continued until 4th Tank Battalion Shermans came at dawn to clear the field of the enemy. The majority of the 476 Japanese victims discovered sprawled in front of Company A's post at dawn. Many Japanese started killing themselves with their grenades after realizing their cause was lost. With only 12 tanks on Tinian, the Japanese launched an attack starting at 3:30 a.m. on the 25th, using half of that number. They were reduced to smoking rubble when they rolled into a storm of lead and steel from massed Marine artillery, anti-tank weapons, bazookas, machine guns, and rifles while attempting to drive out the 23rd Marines north of Tinian town. According to a reporter, our wall of fire was breached by the 3 lead tanks. One turned insane on its tracks, smashed into a ditch, and started to glow blood red. In a final desperate attempt to fight its way out, a second, gravely wounded, turned its machine guns on its tormentors and fired into the ditches. It came to a complete halt after another 100 yards. The third made a desperate attempt to turn and then flee, but our soldiers surrounded it and blew it to pieces. The driver of a 4th tank was killed when bazookas struck it with a direct strike. Screaming, the rest of the men poured out of the turret. Completely cornered, the 5th tank tried to escape. Bazookas handled it quickly. It was set on fire by another hit, and its crew was cremated. The 6th tank managed to escape the scene. Despite losing their tank backup, parts of the 50th Regiment persisted in attacking the 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines, but were destroyed by canister shot fired by 37mm anti-tank weapons. Nevertheless, the conflict continued, with small numbers unsuccessfully hurling themselves at Marine posts. Less than 100 Marines were injured or killed, and 1,241 Japanese bodies covered the battlefield by daylight on July 25th. It is thought that hundreds more were taken away by their fellow soldiers. The Japanese resistance was virtually destroyed, despite the fact that it was only the second day following the landings. Colonel Ogata lost command of his troops and, consequently, the battle, due to a lack of communications. Tinian security was now only a matter of time, but there would still be isolated pockets of opposition to overcome. Small parties occasionally exploited the darkness to launch night attacks throughout the course of the following 7 days. But for the most part, they just withdrew in no specific sequence until there was nowhere left to retreat to, according to a Marine historian. The 2 Marine divisions pushed southward gradually from White Beaches 1 and 2, demolishing enemy positions, pushing the Japanese in front of them, and holding firm whenever a group of Ogata's soldiers attempted to infiltrate Marine lines in the dark or launched a suicidal banzai charge. We still believed the enemy capable of a harder fight, and from day to day during our advance expected a bitter fight that never materialized, stated Lieutenant Colonel Gooderham McCormick, the intelligence officer for the 4th Division, who stated that his division still anticipated a massive, coordinated counterattack. At Tinian, Lieutenant Colonel William W. Buchanan served as the 4th Division's Assistant Naval Gunfire Officer. We employed the identical strategies on Tinian that we did on Saipan, he recalled. Instead of going down the main road, we flushed out every soldier consistently as we went down, using a hand-holding, linear operation, like a group of brush beaters, somebody hunting grouse or whatever. However, this was the simplest and safest course of action. Who was able to critique it? It worked. Once more, the remaining resistance was driven to the island's tip and swiftly crumbled. The grouse hunting or brush beating was far from simple. In addition to the constant threat of mines, booby traps, snipers in trees, or an unexpected attack from out of the jungle, the Marines were worn out by the intense heat, humidity, and rainy monsoon season. The 2nd Marine Division under Major General Watson stepped in to help the 4th Division with the mopping-up effort. The 2nd took control of the northern Ushi Point airfields on July 26 before turning south. The Ushi Point fields were operational for Army P-47 Thunderbolt fighters 2 days later, thanks to the Seabees. Colonel Ogata and his staff were forced to leave their command post on Mount Lasso when the 4th Division ascended Mount Maga in the middle of the island on the 26th. The Marines took Mount Lasso with hardly a shot fired. The sweep southward started on July 27th with the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, in a skirmish line of divisions abreast from one side of the island to the other. Casualties were minimal, and resistance was minimal. The 4th Tank Battalion of the Marines, who were approaching, took control of the Gergen Point airstrip the following day. Major General Cates was questioned about how he motivated his 4th Division soldiers after the battle. "Look here, men," he replied. "The Hawaiian island of Maui is waiting for us. Do you see those ships? They nearly ran over that island, so the sooner you do this, the sooner we'll return there." The drive south was gaining momentum. To preserve the dwindling ammunition supplies, the customary preparatory artillery barrages conducted from guns on Saipan were actually canceled. There was little use in wasting ammunition on enemy-abandoned territory. The Marines had taken control of the island's northern half by dusk on the 29th. More determined pockets of resistance were met as the 4th Marine Division drew closer to Tinian town, and sheets of torrential rain fell. Along with an enemy ground probe against the 3rd Battalion, 25th Marines, Japanese mortars and artillery also descended. However, the unit was routed. The 24th Marine Regiment, 4th Marine Division, under Colonel Franklin A. Hart, was tasked with capturing Tinian town the following day. The division's artillery battalions and the cruisers and destroyers' offshore fire helped them. The 24th's 1st Battalion left once the supporting fires subsided, only to be struck by intense fire from caverns on the town's north shore. Tanks that threw flames immediately put an end to this. After that, engineers used explosives to shut the caverns' mouths. Shortly after 2 p.m. on the 30th, the 24th Marine Regiment entered Tinian Town, which was largely a ghost town surrounded by wreckage. A lone Zero fighter was discovered parked on the crushed coral runway at around the same time that the 25th Marines were busy capturing airfield number 4 on the town's eastern outskirts after putting out some annoying small arms fire. Units from the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, and the 23rd Marines relieved the 24th Marines that evening. The 2nd Marine Division was moving forward to the east until it encountered some resistance. This was quickly overcome when division components pursued an enemy group into a vast cave where 4 machine guns were destroyed and 89 Japanese were killed with the aid of a flame-throwing tank. The 2nd Marines had finished the day's tasks by 6:30 p.m. and were ready to retire for the evening. The United States now controlled around 80% of the island. The last push was about to begin. Late on the afternoon of July the 30th, Major General Schmidt, the commander of the Marine Force on Tinian, gave the 2 divisions an order that was easier to give than to carry out: drive all the way to the southeast coastline, capture all remaining enemy territory, and annihilate the opposing Japanese. Approximately 500 soldiers from the 56th Naval Guard Force and up to 1,800 soldiers from the 50th Infantry Regiment were waiting in caverns and on the rocky terrain of cliffs and a plateau in the southeast part of the island. In their final stronghold, they were prepared to sacrifice themselves for their monarch. The Marines used all of their artillery on the island, together with the 24th Corps artillery on southern Saipan, to shell enemy positions all night long on July 30th and 31 in an effort to weaken the opposition before the attack. The cruisers Louisville, Montpelier, and Birmingham joined the battleships Tennessee and California for a 75-minute bombardment the following morning. This paused long enough to allow 126 P-47s, B-25 bombers, and carrier-based TBF Avenger torpedo bombers to launch a 40-minute attack on the enemy's positions. The planes dropped 69 tons of explosives before the offshore gunfire resumed for another 35 minutes. A Marine historian wrote, "Approximately 6 and 15 tons of munitions were launched at their targets by the battleships and cruisers combined. During the night, 14th Marine gunners fired 2,000 rounds, while 10th Marine artillerymen fired roughly 5,000 rounds. One inmate described the sensation as almost unbearable." The Japanese occupied an almost perfect defensive posture. Marines encountered concentrated mortar and small arms fire as they attempted to climb the plateau's steep slopes and cliffs. Tanks could not traverse the trackless slopes and struggled through the minefields and dense undergrowth. The weapons of armored amphibians patrolling the shoreline were used to suppress hostile fire along the beach. Around 10 in the morning, a Japanese beach unit the size of a company launched a suicide offensive on the 1st Battalion, 24th Marines, and was completely destroyed. Additionally, the 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines encountered obstinate resistance, including a high-caliber weapon that was concealed and drove them to ground. The weapon was swiftly destroyed by the Sherman tanks that were raised. Additionally, a well-hidden concrete bunker was found, and all 20 of the soldiers within were murdered. A crippled Sherman was taken by the Japanese and used as an armored machine gun nest in another area of the battlefield until it was destroyed by another American tank. As additional battalions surrounded the base and started scaling the slopes, the 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines, and a company from the 2nd Battalion eventually made it to the top of the plateau late in the afternoon. By late afternoon, the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines had reached the summit, followed by 2nd Battalion elements. They spent the night there. By the time we got up there wasn't enough daylight left to get ourselves properly barbed wired in, to get our fields of fire established, to sight our interlocking bands of machine gun fire, all the things that should be done in preparing a good defense. Company Commander, Captain Carl W. Hoffman, recalled his experiences on top of the plateau on the evening of July 31st. The enemy launched a series of probing attacks by dusk. Our positions were invaded by a few Japanese. The night was pitch black. As a result of the Japanese occupying our positions, our men got extremely tense and began challenging everyone they saw. By this time, They were well seasoned, so we didn't have any regrettable instances of Marines shooting Marines. The intensity of enemy strikes began to increase steadily as the night went on. At last, they attacked our battalion with a full-scale banzai attack. The Japanese executed a series of waves of attacks against a 37mm post using canister ammunition, which was an odd move. That gun just piled up Japanese dead people. Another Marine gunner would drop in as soon as the first one did. With front of that weapon, we were soon almost shoulder-high with dead Japanese. We had vanquished the adversary before morning. There were hundreds, if not more, dead ones all around us. Throughout the Pacific War, Captain Hoffman, who played the trumpet, took his horn with him. He pulled out the instrument and started playing some songs to calm everyone down when the fighting on top of the plateau subsided. In response to pleas, my Marines were yelling things like, "Oh, you beautiful doll," and "pretty baby." We suddenly heard the yell of "Banzai" as I was playing these songs. A lone Japanese soldier was sprinting straight toward the barbed wire and toward me. He must have been struck simultaneously from 14 separate directions by the Marines, who had their rifles ready. His grenade was not thrown by him. I've consistently pointed to him as the person who didn't enjoy my music. He didn't like the way I played the trumpet. However, after we had taken him into account, I even carried on with my little concert. The Japanese persisted in attacking the Marines for the following 2 days, and while they were able to cause some fatalities, they were systematically killed in the process. General Schmidt announced Tinian secured at 6:55 p.m. on August 1st, the day Ogata committed suicide. But several Japanese reservists were unaware of the announcement. Isolated groups of the enemy persisted in attacking the American lines, or refused to emerge from their hiding spots over the following few months. Actually, it wasn't until 1953 that Murata Susumu, the final surviving member of Tinian, was found. He was employed by NKK, the biggest sugar company in the Marianas, as a Japanese civilian rather than a soldier. The Japanese weren't the only people hiding in caverns. Up to 1,000 civilians from the island had also taken refuge there in order to escape the war, and they were just now starting to leave, unsure of their future. The war for Tinian is thought to have claimed the lives of over 4,000 civilians. Marines had watched in helpless horror as residents on adjacent Saipan flung themselves over cliffs out of fear that the Marines would torture and murder them. On Tinian, mass suicides were fortunately uncommon, although several civilians who walked into Marine lines at night were unintentionally shot dead. Additionally, the remaining Japanese made groups of people run at the Americans by attaching explosives to them. Additionally, numerous individuals were thrown off cliffs by Japanese soldiers. In August 14th, Major General Cate's whole 4th Marine Division set ship for its base camp in Maui, fulfilling his pledge to his men. It had sustained over 1,100 losses, including 212 fatalities during the Tinian operation. Iwo Jima would be its next deployment. With 105 fatalities and 655 injuries, the 2nd Marine Division would stay in the Marianas until the end of the war. Less than 400 of the 9,000 Japanese soldiers who had defended Tinian are thought to have been captured, and almost all of them were killed. Admiral Spruance described the landing of 42,000 men and their equipment across the narrow white beaches as the most brilliantly conceived and executed amphibious operation in World War II. Smith agreed, referring to it as the perfect amphibious operation. This was made possible by the efforts of the Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion. The Marianas gave the Army Air Forces the bases they required to strike Japan once Tinian was taken. They were 1,200 nautical miles from Japan's home islands, which was perfect for the B-29's 2,800-mile range, according to a historian. 2 wings of the 20th Air Force were assigned to Tinian. B-29s were striking the Japanese mainland 3 months after Tinian was conquered. According to data provided by the Air Force, B-29s conducted 29,000 sorties from the Marianas over the course of the following year, dropping 7,000 tons of explosives that, according to Japanese estimates, killed 26,000 people, left 92,000 homeless, and destroyed or burned 21,000 dwellings. Enola Gay's flight on August 6, 1945, guaranteed Tinian's position in military history. It hit Hiroshima with a nuclear bomb. A second nuclear weapon was dropped on Nagasaki 2 days later. The Japanese administration gave up the following day. When the 2nd Marine Division learned of the surrender, they reacted as follows, according to Richard W. Johnston's official history of the division. They thought of the forbidding coasts of Japan, the coasts that awaited them in the fall, and they looked at Tinian's clean and rocky coast, at the coral boulders where they had gone ashore. At last, one Marine remarked, "I guess that Tinian was a pretty good investment."